Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook, where anything can be a canvas for creativity if you invest the time to learn the techniques. Make sure to check the description for our videos because the links to all the HTP products will be there for you to make it easy to find the things you need to recreate the project. We found this little chest in a thrift store, and it's a bit of a puzzle. If you first look at the shape of it, it looks like it could have been a sewing machine chest, but it's way too small for that, unless it was one of the teeny tiny, very early sewing machines from the 1840s. And I don't think this piece is that old, but it's definitely old. There's the curved wood and all of the veneer that is all over this. I believe there was veneer on here at one point because I can feel glue residue, but someone has unfortunately popped that off at some point. And when you open it up, the inside of this is veneered. A large portion of the base in here also had veneer. The two side pieces, someone has popped the veneer off. But all of this veneer is in place, and it appears that this chain is original. It's a unique style that I haven't seen before, but obviously the screws are not original, and the hinges are not original. It has popped apart back here, and you can see that it's very, very thin, the wood, but it's cut to bevel into the other piece of wood here. There's some really bad buckling on the veneer on this side, and there is some buckling on the veneer over here, but this is going to go back and glue very easily. So we're going to try to salvage this side, which is part of the purpose of this video, is to show you ways that you can salvage veneer even when it's buckled badly, that you don't have to just pry it all off, sand it all down, and paint it, because my goal is to be able to stain this at one point. Another really interesting feature on this is there is a lock down here in the front, which really doesn't make sense on the bottom of a chest. Why would you have a lock down here that does not go up to the top? It has nothing to do with the top. There's no lock on the top of the chest. We don't have the key to it, but we have been able to open it up, and we still need to work on it to get it to move smoother. Jim, it may take your hands to get this popped the rest of the way over. There we go. So you can see that it's very definitely a lock mechanism. So one of the things I thought about is maybe it was to hold it in place on a workbench, but the latest thing that I thought about is, could this have been for a ship's captain? Could this maybe have held charts, documents, the purchase orders, and what the ship is actually carrying? Could that cask have done that? And this lock into the top of a desk have held this in place in stormy seas? That seems to me to make the most sense with this piece for what it could have been. So we're going to work on putting it back together. Just gluing and clamping this part will immediately put the lid squared back up where it needs to be. So we'll see how this goes, and hopefully along the way you'll learn some techniques to help you salvage some things, even if it's a tabletop, the top of an end table. The techniques that we use in these videos all work on larger items. It's just you work in sections when you're working on a larger item. So we'll get started on this. You want your cloth wet, very wet, but not running water out of it. Put it on top of the area that's all buckled up, because you need to get that wood wet starting to get it wet to soften it so that it's able to start bending back into the shape it should have been. Water is what deformed it. Water is what will reshape it. There's a lot of old finish on this. I'm not worried about water messing with this finish. On an old piece of furniture with old finish that the veneer was up, I would again do this before I did any sanding to remove any of the finish. And I'm pressing down a little bit in the hope that through those cracks I get a little bit of water underneath those cracks. And then I'm going to lay it flat on here. This is going to produce a lot of steam. The iron that I have is extremely hot. There's no water in it. The water in the cloth is what is going to create the steam, but you don't want your face against it. I'm not letting that go all the way down. I'm just letting it heat the cloth to start working on the veneer. Move it to another wet spot. Now I'm starting to let the iron have a little bit of weight down on it. And it's definitely starting to soften this. To keep any stuff off your iron, keep laying the same side down and the same side up. I'm just letting the iron rest on here now. You would not do this with a dry cloth. You'd start to burn the finish, and that would be a disaster. Yes, it's definitely starting to move back in to where it needs to be. This is still wet enough for me to create steam over here. And I'm pressing down on the iron to help bring that back down into place. It's a slow process. This isn't a do it one time, press it really hard, and your veneer is back where it needs to be. You have to be patient. I've put the block of wood on here to see if I can help cool it down with some flattening to help pull it into place, similar to how you would press clothes in a dry cleaners. They have cool pieces that help to pull the heat out enough. And this is coming back down really nicely. There's some places here that are going to need some delicate work before they're glued in, but this is doing really nicely. This spot right here is really good and wet. Just watch that you're still getting steam so that you know your cloth has not dried out. Because you need that steam to keep going and not have dry heat going into it. This piece right here, not all the way across it, but that piece right there can be pressed down. I'll pull it back, pull this off. Shiny narrower piece. Hold that on there till it's starting to cool. I'll start to do that to this piece in a minute, but I need to move some of those pieces back carefully with a small screwdriver so that they come into place where they need to be. And I'm putting a lot of pressure on this. This is now beautifully back down. But I can lift it up while it's still hot and wet to put some glue under there. And actually I need to do that with this piece while it's still hot. So I need small screwdrivers to lift that up with. And this small screwdriver that I have, I'm going to be able to lift this carefully. This is also how you remove veneer, because you reactivate what is called the hide glue in here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to tip this on its side. Put this over here so I don't get myself a really nasty burn. Tip this down this way. I'm going to leave this pulled out. And I'm going to let glue go down in there. This is the Type Bond glue. And then I'm going to push the screwdriver in there to help get glue underneath there. So I'm going to use the screwdriver to push glue all down in here. So that this doesn't buckle back up. Yep, that may work. Jim's got a piece of wire here that'll help. Push more down in here. Just basically, and then just sweeping back and forth. So you're getting glue all down into there. If it had been in the center of a table, I would have gone in the split and lifted the split up to do that. I need to get the glue off of this so I can reuse it in a minute. And set it back up. And And this time I'm going to use a wet paper towel to lay on it to squeeze it down. So I really do not want to glue this seam yet. So I've got to get the glue out of there. So I'm definitely not ready for that to be glued yet. Beat this down in the crack so that this does not glue together. And it's also what I'm going to use to lay across here in a minute. And I lay this down again with the heat. Get that soft again. That's wanting to move out of place. So I'm using the screwdriver to put it back in there. This one is not ready to be clamped yet. So just this piece is going to be put in, tightened. Wipe some more of that excess glue off. And we need weight on here and clamps. Find your easiest spot before you put glue on. Find your easiest spot to get steady, hard pressure to hold down what you're gluing when you're gluing veneer back on. If you were doing a tabletop, a spot that was out toward the middle, you'd need to have a long board and clamps on each side to really pull it down tight to the tabletop. In this case, we're working from the inside. This has a little bit larger, these clamps have a little bit larger foot on them to grab to put more even pressure on this. So this needs to dry for a while before we come back and start working on the second piece here that needs work. But it's already considerably flatter than it was. Removed the clamps, and this had been let dry for about 2.5 hours. The tight bond dries fast enough that that's a short enough time. If you were using regular wood glue, I would let it dry for at least 6 or 8 hours. This part is smooth, flat, and adhered. So now I've got to work on this section, but I also know that the steam can reactivate the glue on this side over here. So when we go to clamp it the second time, we're going to need to have a board that goes across both pieces to hold it down so that this will stay there. There's going to be a little bit of a dip right here in the middle of the board, but that's because of the two boards that are on the inside and that the veneer was removed from the inside, so that's allowed all that, the wood on the inside, to move. I can't repair all that, This is too fragile to take the entire thing apart and try to redo every section of it. So my goal is just to get this outside veneer looking good so that I can refinish it. So this is going to go through exactly the same steps. I'm going to start with the wet cloth on here, then steaming and pressing to get this. This is a lot more broken in here, so this is going to be a little trickier to get this all to lay flat. But I still think we can salvage it. The iron is hot again. It's starting to move down. And just like before, once it starts to soften, I start pressing down with the iron as I'm steaming. Oh, be careful too, these get hot when you're handling them. Took the lid off of this to help make this a little more, yeah, this is getting much more malleable here. I'm using the flat side of a small screwdriver to start working these pieces of veneer back down into place. Since this one was so splintered, and over here, this is wanting to come back up, which I knew it was going to because of re-steaming, which is why we've got a board cut that will fit this whole section once I get it in place here. Hide glue has let go under here, which is actually helpful because it's going to let me get some of this moved back where it needs to be. And you definitely do not want to use a large head screwdriver for this, because you're going to tear your wood to pieces. This is starting to cool off. I've got part of it back where I want it. So I'm going to steam it again. Jim, hand me the spray bottle. I am going to spray this one with water. This one is buckled so badly. Jim, do you have a small putty knife there? No, I need a really small head one. That one to your left hand, left of your hand. Yep. Yep, that one's more flexible. so hopefully I avoid being burned. I've got this pulled loose quite a bit here. So, because this was buckled so badly and so long. Most of the time, veneer doesn't have a rippled out brokenness to it when it's on a full piece of furniture. This poor thing had a lot of damage done to it. But I'd still rather have, because there's going to be some crackling in this no matter what, I'd rather have the veneer than the plain wood under there. That's a personal preference for what you want. Pull it back up so I can start working to try to lay it down. I need my putty knife again to get this piece back on. There we go, into that spot. Use wet paper towel to get the excess glue off. Some of this I can sand down gently. I want to have that really soft again from heat before I clamp it. Don't use a hammer to do this. Use a rubber mallet. A hammer will break it and create nasty, nasty gouges. Now then, put the wax paper over. Put a solid piece of wood across it and clamping both sides because it will wing up and you won't get a smooth, tight finish. We're going to do that off camera. This side on camera probably looks pretty good, but from about right here all the way over, there's a lot of loose spots on this. But when I press it down, it's all laying in place where it should. So I don't have to work in segments on this. I can try to get all of this to lift loose, put my glue under, push it back down, clean it off so that there's not a lot of glue on there, and clamp it. I've got one spot over here that may have a little bit of difficulty because it's a tiny piece that's split, but I should be able to get that back in there. So I'm going to mist this lightly with water off my spray bottle. I can let it sit directly on this one because everything is flat, nothing's buckled. Test it. Well, I'm going to clamp this and let it dry because it acts like it has reactivated the hide glue and is holding it down because the steam is not lifting this off. Oh, I've got a spot right there that needs more. But this is not lifting off. So I'm going to heat that area right there. Again, I've not had this happen in a long time, but it's a happy accident if it's going to work. I know right in there, up against that, was not as hot.
What is hide glue?
Hide glue is literally an old-fashioned glue that was made from boiling down scrap pieces of hide, especially from cows, but sometimes pigs. And it acts as it's actually a little, I believe some of the parts of it, content of it is similar to the gelatin that comes out of animal hooves and all. Okay, that's going to do that right there where it's like it's supposed to, but I'm still going to put the wax paper underneath and clamp all this and see what it does when it dries. Give it a couple of hours to cool down completely and dry and see if those areas stayed down flat. Off camera, we have finished gluing and clamping all of the areas where the veneer was loose. We tried on the bottom using stripper because I was hoping I could do that rather than the risk of sanding. But the stripper was not getting in there and it was needing to get really, really wet to do anything. I didn't want the veneer to lift off of here. So this end that you can see right now All of the finish has been sanded off using 220 grit and a small triangular orbital sander. An orbital sander won't scratch up your grain. What you have to be really careful of when you're sanding any veneer, it's really easy to do what is called burn through the veneer, which means you suddenly have gone through it and you've got a big old hole that there's no veneer and you've got the wood underneath. And those are very hard to hide. You have to be very adept with faux finishing to get those hidden. So when you're sanding veneer, you have to sand, lift up, not keep going and pushing hard, but just let the sander go across it on its own. Wipe it down with paper towels to wipe it off, get an angle so you can see the light across it. Where is there still finish on it? Go to those areas and keep sanding it, coming off, wiping, coming off, wiping, so that you don't burn through. So this has been completely sanded, and when we got it damp, we could see that it's going to look really pretty with stain on it. It looks very uneven right now, and that's normal with old dried wood that's had finish on it. This really is not stain. This is the color that the wood has turned from aging for, I would say, at least 100 years on this piece. We have also cleaned out this corner, which was broken loose because it had a lot of glue in it where somebody had tried to haphazardly glue it but didn't clamp it. So now we've got that cleared out and smooth, and we're going to clamp that together with glue and let it dry. We also have, Jim has created 2 pieces to go at each end of this that match the side pieces here that were put in for stability. I'm not sure why they were removed off the end of this, but all the veneer was removed off of this too. So that's another thing we're going to be working on, is replacing veneer on the inside of this when we get through gluing this and clamping it. So this is going to be put inside, glued and clamped in place. At the same time, this is clamped together to hold this, to help square this box up and make sure everything is completely tight and has 90-degree corners in it to keep this from being out of balance when you're actually going to use it. So that is the step that we're going to be doing now, and then we'll let it sit until it has completely dried. So it'll probably sit overnight before we do anything else to it to make sure the glue has really dried well. The glue we're going to use is the Tight Bond Thick and Quick. It holds really well, and because it dries quickly, it's going to be able to adhere to this wood very quickly to keep it in place, as well as with the clamps. And you're going to see a ton of clamps on this thing by the time we're done. Instead of just squirting glue in here and haphazardly going, I want to make sure that there is glue over the entire surface. So I'm using a small chisel. You could use a small screwdriver just to get down in here and smooth it on both sides of this piece. We also have a wet paper towel waiting to wipe this down once we have it clamped. To pull in that center, Jim, should we add one of those small pieces of wood that we had out to just add some extra push against this?
No, that's fine.
Be fine? All right.
Do we want this?
I don't think we want that in until we get this positioned. What I was thinking is whether or not we needed some extra wood here to push this in more.
I'm going to put another clamp on.
Okay.
You need to guide the corner where you want
It's got it.
it.
Yep. And this is where 2 hands are helpful, because you want all of this to line up. this wetter. This is just ink. You don't want to leave glue sitting on your surface because stain will not adhere to it. Without the noise of sanders, I wanted to go over some things with you of the different tools that we used to get this finish off and get this down to this point. And to emphasize some different things when you're sanding veneer, because veneer is fragile, and the older it is, the drier it is, and the easier it is to burn through it. The first thing we used was a triangular orbital sander with 220 grit, because that has a point here for us. It allows you to do some bend on here, and it allows you to get into angles here. Thankfully, this grain was all going one way, so it could be used with this. To set this inside here on the edge and get along these. And when you're dealing with curves, it becomes really tricky. On the top of this, many of you are going to look at that and go, well, it's not sanded all the way. Look, it's got multiple colors on there. That's not sanded right. She needs to sand that more. No, I don't, because I have all of the finish off of this, and what's actually showing up on this is grain. And this almost looks like quarter sawed oak, but not quite. It might simply be a really old tree, because this is at least 100 years old, this little chest is, by how it's constructed. And that needed to have all of the glue gotten off of it, so the orbital sander was the best thing to start with. But then, and actually we had used on the very top of it to start with, to get some of the glue off, a carbon scraper to pull. I'm not going to put it on the surface because this is completely finished and ready for stain now, but pulling on it to pull a lot of that glue off before we started the orbital sander. And then I used a wood block that has 220 grit sandpaper attached to it with double-sided carpenter's tape on it. That's also used, called carpet tape in some of the places when you look for it now. And going straight up and down on this. But because of the age, there's some little dips in it. So that's when I went in with my hand and going into specific areas, rolling it up, so I'm only hitting the area I need to. This edge here, this became a good tool for getting flat in here and pulling back from it. You can't go, when you had to sand this edge here, you have to stay up off of this, or what happens is suddenly you have sanded all along this against the grain, and you have scarred up your veneer, and you will not get it down far enough. So you can see here on the front, you would not go down flat to this. You would just be up high on it to get that off. And in some places where there was heavy finish or there was glue, I used two different chisels to come straight down on it, coming straight down, and then coming straight up and flipping out what I had cut down to get the finish right along this edge. And again, you don't want to scrape back and forth like this because you create a nasty line in here. And then rotating this up and down, working from the bottom up to get that finish right against that board out, and then going straight up and down, following the grain. A sponge is not as effective as a wood or plastic block because the sponge gives. It doesn't take the pressure that your hand is giving, so it doesn't give you the control. On the inside, because the curve is the opposite direction, this round one was really helpful because I could go into this. Initially, I could get down into the edges here. I could get straight across here. I could get most of this following the grain, always following the grain. But this has wood in between. It's a wood dowel. That allowed me to get into this curve and get all of the finish out. And then by hand, I went into the areas that I could not get with a block, which took me longer to work on them. The other thing we had to clean out was on the inside of this, there was a lot of old wood glue. Somebody had really just dumped runs of glue trying to hold this together. The carbide blade run along the bottom and into the corner of that, and coming up the sides where that, coming up from the bottom up the sides where there were just runs of glue for some reason. But that got glue out of these areas, and that was also an area where that I had to use the chisel, come straight down, come straight back, straight down, straight back, to pop out those pieces of glue that did not need to be there because they weren't holding this together. It was just leaving it as a mess inside. And your stain, the HTP stains, because they're topical gel stains, will cover, but it's still not going to look nice, and it's not going to have the same coloration as other areas, and it's going to want to lift off just like coming off of plastic. You'd have to work with it with an art brush to hold it in place. And I just wanted the inside of this to look better. This piece will never be perfect. It's definitely handmade. The joints don't all fit together. Some of that I think is attributable to the fact that this has aged, been tossed around. It appears to have had some moisture at some point. So all those things will cause the wood to swell and move. And it's just not sturdy enough to take all of this apart, to take all this molding off, completely dismantle this. It's not worth the effort on it, and you're not likely to be able to get it back together because of the warpage that's on it. But it's been squared up as much as we can, and it's got one spot on the inside that's getting filled with wood filler, just so it's smooth, and then it's going to be ready to have stain applied to it. But as you're working on pieces like this, take the time to get the finish sanded off. Take the time to be patient and work slowly. You can salvage a lot of veneers everywhere around this. Where this was loose, where it had those bad buckle points, it's all completely smooth now. And so that's part of what you will see. And before I, because I'll need to let this dry before I start with the stain, I want to put a little bit of acetone, which will not interfere with the stain going on to this, and show you in places what this grain is going to look like as it as it's gotten wet, of what that's going to look like. It will be more even, but you can see there's a lot of grain in this, and it's drying really fast because acetone evaporates quickly. But that's one of the ways to see what something's going to look like before you start to stain it as well, is to run some acetone on it to see what the grain is going to look like. One of the things you run into if you have to do a large wood fill repair and you're going to do staining is you can wind up with a place like this. It's on the inside of this, so it's not a huge big deal, but I still like things to look nice. So I'm going to have to treat that differently. If I just rub stain over that and then wipe back, I'm going to have a really nasty, big, dark blob that's going to hold that. The other thing is I've done a wood fill on this. When you've done wood fill with something you're going to stain, you do not want to stain directly over that wood fill. It's going to absorb it in, and it's going to create a really big dark spot that you cannot fix. So you want to make sure before you do the staining on it with a topical stain that you have sprayed it with shellac. If you're using a penetrating stain, you can't do that because the shellac will seal the surface and it won't let the penetrating stain go in. So I'm going to use the topical, but I'm going to treat it the way that I would a penetrating stain so that you can see how to avoid big globs in here. Also, when you first open stain that's been sitting that is a gel stain, it doesn't matter what brand it is. If it's a gel stain, it will over time seal itself, and when you open it up, you'll be like, my gel stain's ruined, I gotta throw it away, what a waste. But you really don't. What this is a skin that forms over the top because there's air against it, and it's actually protected your stain that is underneath. You do not want to try to stir this in. And now I've lifted out a whole skin off the top of this that is the same distance around as the can of stain. Let me get that off my fingers, off my gloves, because I don't want to touch anything unintentionally with this. Now, you do need at this point to stir this gel stain because it has top coat in it. You don't want to beat it up and put a bunch of air bubbles in it, but you do want to get it thoroughly mixed, and you don't want to come up here at the top edge and try to scrape out anything in the top because that's got dried on areas that you do not want to have little bits in your stain. Okay. So now I'm going to get a paper plate so I'll have something to daub my cloth on, and I'm also going to have something to daub this onto. The gel stain goes a really long way. If you're going, especially if you're going to wipe it back, you do not need to apply a big amount on there like you're putting paint on. You need very little. But the first thing I'm going to work on is this. I want to show you what happens when I take a chip brush, and I don't want a lot on it. I've worked it into the bristles, but it's not thick on there. You can see there are grain lines coming here on this. I want to create some of those in here over these spots that have the fill on them. Now, I want to let that dry. It doesn't look right now, and it's not going to, but that is the first step on it to help it look more natural instead of just being a blob of brown in there. If you don't do that to it, you definitely just get a big spot. Now, I've torn up a square, well, I've cut a square that's about 5-6 inches square of old t-shirt material that is not going to put lint onto this, and I've wrapped it around 2 fingers. I've got a little bit on here. Now I'm going to do the inside of this box first so that I'm not touching any of the outside once I've put stain on it. I don't want fingerprints on this, so if I do the inside first, I can get a coat on the inside and the outside. If I did the outside first, I'd have to wait, let it dry, and then do the inside, or risk getting finger marks in the stain all over the outside of this. The new pieces of wood that we have done are probably going to need 2 coats, so I'm going to go ahead and put a coat of stain on this, and I'm using the tobacco stain, which should bring this pretty close to the color that the wood is now. By not having it heavy on there, I can control the amount of stain that I'm putting into it. Now, this by itself right now, I can go against the grain trying to work my finger into those corner seams, but then my last strokes need to be flat across it. Now, this is fairly close to the look of this now, but it won't match what this looks like in here when it's stained. So this first coat of stain on here is going to help this. And I'm going to go ahead and stain the bottom of this. You want to keep, if you're using a cloth, you want to keep it wrapped tight around your finger. Now, I don't want to work on this top band first. I want to work on the inside, because otherwise my hand is going to be all in that. You can work in circles, rubbing this on. Just let your last strokes be following the grain. That way you won't have any missed spots. And I hope you can tell it's taking very, very little stain to get this finished in and really looking nice. If I put a lot on my cloth, I'd be spending a lot of time trying to get it back off the cloth. Not off the cloth, but back off the wood. And that's just a waste of gel stain. It's just not what you want to do. And on the ends, they went horizontal. with the veneer. This is the end that had big pieces buckled out and broken on it, and it is completely smooth. There's some places in this where there's some missing veneer, but the pieces were too small to efficiently cut them out and repair them. Last part I am hitting with the stain is that very top edge. But you can see how much different that is beginning to look as it's drying. Now, the reasoning behind how I did this and the order in which I did it is so I had some place to hold onto this without damaging it, without messing up where I already had finish. So now I need to work on the top. And I will work on this piece exactly the same way, doing the inside first and then the outside. If you can't get in to a seam with the cloth, use a chip brush, a small chip brush. In this case, I'm doing the bottom edge here first before I flip it over, because I'm going to be working completely on the top of it, and I don't want to have to pick it back up again. Anywhere you can see any bare wood. In this case, there's some spots here that didn't get stained originally. And I need to get the stain worked down in there. The difference between a good stain job and an incomplete one is not getting into those grooves, those seams or that you wind up with it not having any stain in there and it shows badly. Running along my finger here, but I did not touch this curved portion at all when I did that. I'm using extra stain that was up here from getting into that crack to bring down onto this curve. So you kind of got to look at this just like the paint. You have to step back and look at it in all different light angles. To make sure you have not missed anything. You want to be really careful that you're not dragging your cloth back onto the sides that you've already completed. I added more stain onto the top while it was still wet because I wanted to bring it more into the tone of the rest of this. And now I'm looking because I just saw where I had touched my cloth on there that would have left a bad looking spot. And I'm going to go back around and double check that there's nothing on this rim anywhere that should not be there. Like right there, there was a little bit on the end cap of that. Taking those extra couple of minutes to look at what you have. And I want to make sure there's no high spots of stain that's going to dry, which is why I'm going back over this. Because by putting that extra amount on there, it's easy to have those, and I want that to be really nice and level when it's dry. So now this is ready to dry, and it needs to dry about 24 hours, and then we'll look at it to see what the next steps are for it. This is dried overnight, approximately 20 hours. It's dry enough at this point that I can add the top coat that I'm choosing to. It does not need a top coat. The gel stain has top coat in it, and if you like this finish, which is very low luster, you're done. You're good to go. I want it to have the satin luster that the gel stain has when you put it over a previously finished surface. When you put it over raw wood or wood that's been sanded down with no finish on it, which is raw wood again, but it's been finished at some point. This had no finish on it, so when you apply the gel stain, it comes down to a very low luster, very little sheen finish, which a lot of people love over raw wood. I want to have the satin sheen on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 coats of polyurethane on it, and I'm going to show you how that I do that. I do not like polyacrylic, and especially over oil-based products. It has a slight cloudiness to it, and over time it will crackle off of an oil finish, which I don't want. I want this to permanently be finished and done when I'm done with it. And the new polyurethanes are not orangey. They don't turn color in light quickly like the old ones, and well, primarily the old cheap ones that builders used on cabinets, and that's why you got that awful orange color. The new polyurethanes give a beautiful finish and just bring out a little bit more richness and depth of the grain, which is what I want to happen with this piece. So I'm going to set the lid aside, and I'm also going to show you what polyurethane looks like when you first open it and how you need to stir it, that you cannot just open it and start using it, but you don't want to create bubbles in it. So that's where we're going with this. So I'm going to take the lid off. There we go. This at the top is clear, but when I pull from the bottom, there is this kind of material in it because it settles out. So you want to stir slowly. I prefer the handle of a spoon simply because it works more like a small paint paddle and is less likely to create bubbles in this. I don't want to stir hard, and I keep pulling up from the bottom to see what it's doing. This is a satin polyurethane. This one is by Behr. Minwax makes an excellent one. So does Varathane. And you can see as I'm stirring now, I'm not getting as much on the spoon handle. You do not want bubbles in an oil-based product because they'll dry in it. They can't break out and burst quickly enough as it's drying. At this point, the polyurethane looks cloudy, but it will not be cloudy when it dries. But now I know I have it completely mixed and ready to go. You can use a brush, but to get a really smooth finish, it's easier to use a foam brush for most people. And you don't want a great big giant one working on something small like this, and even on a tabletop, I wouldn't use more than a 3-inch. This is a 2-inch. I'm going to pause with the camera because I want to get the inside of this polyurethane, and that's going to be very hard for you to see. And then I'll come back and polyurethane the outside. One thing that I forgot to mention to you all that you did not see me do before I put the stain on, I did not degloss this piece before I stained it because it was all freshly sanded. I knew it had not been sitting. I didn't have oils attached to it. My hands had not been on it with oil on them. So at that point, if you have freshly sanded wood that you know has not got any oils on it, you don't need to degloss before adding stain. But if you have bought something like cabinets to stain, those have got to be deglossed using the wipes so you don't raise the grain terribly, because there will be oils on there from manufacturing, from handling, from shipping, and from customers touching them if they're buying anything that's off the floor. So that has to be done. But something like this that I knew was just completely just done, there was no need to do it because the stain was going to adhere to that raw wood. Another thing, when you're starting to put polyurethane on with the sponge brushes, you really have to watch your first runs of finish, because the sponge has not yet soaked up polyurethane and it will tend to skip. So you just have to watch that. This I've used on the inside, so it's not going to skip anywhere for me. It's going to go completely smooth the way I need it to. And hopefully you can see how the finish is bringing out the grain. And just like a regular brush, you want to follow the grain, and you want to have this in good enough light. I'm pouncing where I've got some pieces of veneer missing so that the polyurethane gets down in there. You don't want to go crosswise. With stain and with finish, you want to follow it. And I'm just going to go ahead and pounce across the top here where those spots are. And I'm at an angle here so that I can clearly see where the finish may be not going completely on. You can see I'm using the point to get into the groove and then going back and smoothing. On this side, the grain is going horizontal, so that's how I will apply it. I'm fine with the clear coat going over the brass because it will help keep it from tarnishing since it's completely cleaned now. I'm going to go in all the grooves. But right now my most important thing is I want to get into all of these grooves. And across that decorative piece, it's all going to go horizontal. I want to look and make sure that I do not have runs in here. Coming back across this. Definitely looking from a variety of angles because you will miss things. That spot right there, I wouldn't have caught. Very last thing I will do on this edge . Just like with paint, you want to make sure you haven't gotten any overage runs. Right there on this back side there was. base first coat is ready to dry. For exactly the same reason that I did the inside of the lid staining it first, I'm going to put finish on the inside. And I prefer doing, on a box, I prefer doing the short end pieces like this first, because you're definitely going to get into this portion of it trying to put the finish on that. You may not be able to see it super clearly, but adding the top coat is really enhancing and bringing out the grain much more than leaving it with a low luster sheen. So it's definitely a personal preference of what you want your pieces to look like. If I've got pretty grain, I really like to have it showcased. Don't leave places where that your brush has touched down and left a line. Those lines will still be there when it dries. And to get rid of them, you would have to sand the finish until you had removed them. I'm looking for runs or any areas that I have those marks from the brush. I'm not going to put top coat on this edge until after my top coats are completely done. And that'll be the last thing that I seal in with one coat of polyurethane. Because if I flip it right now, which I need to do, it would cause the top to grab anything that's on these wood pieces, and they would glue down to it, and I don't want that. I'm absolutely loving how this grain is just really vibrant now with the polyurethane. It was pretty before, but this just really enhances it. You have a little bit more work time with oil-based products than you do the water-based, but even with the oil-based, you don't want to overwork. Once your top coat starts to dry, you will get dry marks in it. That you don't want. And just because your foam brush went over the surface doesn't mean that it applied the top coat. There were places there that definitely had not gotten top coat, and there's another one right there. checking for those bubbles again. It's a super light touch. And it just magically breaks them just like it does on the paint. So that you're left with an absolutely beautiful, smooth finish. And when you apply to the flat surface, you don't want to start on the edges. You want to start where you've got a spot where you can move your excess finish so that you're not creating runs down the side. And just like I do in other videos, to get a crisp edge there, I'm coming at a diagonal toward that edge. So I'm not applying the polyurethane so that it's going to create a bunch of runs, but I'm getting off that edge completely. You would do the same thing on a tabletop. You would go, your final stroke with a band finish would be walking along the side of something to get a complete run so that this is completely smooth. So I'm going to make one more pass to smooth those out. And let this dry. This also needs to dry about 24 hours before you do anything else to it. I want 2 coats of polyurethane on this. If it were a tabletop, I would want 3, sometimes 4. But when you first have put polyurethane on your very first coat, whether it's over stain or whether it's over the HTP gel stain, when you run your hand over it, you will feel that it's not glass smooth. So you want to take a green Scotch-Brite Scrubby. This one has been only used for sanding. Do not use one you have used with deglosser with HTP paint. You want a brand new one or one that you set aside like I have with this one for sanding. And when you're sanding over polyurethane, you're not sanding like you're sanding on the first layers of the wood. You're doing a light sanding. You'll see when I'm working on it that it gives a little bit of a cloudy look to it. And you're going to want to bend the scrubby at different times. For instance, like right on here and here on this top edge of this right here, I will just take a corner to get the top edge of that, because I do not want to go across on this up here. Then I'm going to feel it, and then I'm going to start on the inside of this, following the grain. And you can see that I'm starting to get some dust of the polyurethane off of there. I'm going to move this out so I can get this edge. And when I'm dealing with the curve that's on here, I'm going to be following that curve, because that's how the grain of this was put in here. You want to come up from the bottom, just like I was doing in other steps. And it's going to be a little scary because this starts to look like, oh my gosh, you're ruining the finish. It's going to be all scratched, but it's not. And you want to sand to the point that you have this dull look to it. Then on pieces like this, I'm going to come up following that green line. And off camera, I will work more on these two areas. I just want to show you so that you know how to pay attention to which way you are going, that you are always going to follow the grain line, because you will have micro lines in the finish. And then again, I'm going to use the edge of this to get into the grooves. And on the top of the box here, it's going to be a straight back and forth, following that grain line. Only I will want that down on a flat surface, not rocking on this. Then when you finish with that, all you need to do is take a damp, not wet, paper towel. It does not have to have mineral spirits. It doesn't have to be a special tack cloth. And you can see the little bit of discoloration that's on here. It's picked up a little bit of sanding residue that I have created on this. And now this is getting super smooth, ready to put the final coat of polyurethane on to have a just beautifully smooth finish on this. If you don't sand between coats with the green scrubby, you're going to wind up with a really bumpy, rough surface. It doesn't take very long at all, and it gives you that gorgeous finish that makes a really nice, professionally looking done piece. Off camera, I finished sanding all of this with the green scrubby, removed all the sanding residue with the damp paper towels, and put the second coat of polyurethane on it. Now this has the same finish that the HTP stain has over previously finished pieces of wood, and I like the sand finish on it. I didn't want this to have the unfinished look to it. And I know that's some people's preference, and if that's what you wanted, you could have stopped at that point. The chain that was with this has been, let's see if I can bring it over to this camera. That was boiled in a 1-to-1 solution of water and vinegar for about 15 minutes. It loosened sloppy finish that had been put on there and took all the tarnish off. We also shortened it so that the lid didn't go any farther than this. I decided to keep it. It's definitely not the same age as the chest, but the chest probably, as the more we worked on this thing, trying to get it squared up and all, was probably created by an apprentice, either as a chest this size for a specific purpose, or as a method of training them for how to begin working with veneers, putting locks in, putting hinges into shapes. That's what it has more the look of, because it was definitely handcrafted and not a high quality handcrafting for the time period that it probably is, because it's probably still, I believe it's still at least 100 years old. But now it's got at least another 100 years going with it. And one of the things I wanted you to see is the sides where this had buckling. There's still a little bit of an indentation right there that can't be fixed because the boards on the inside could not be forced farther out. We tried. That's totally smooth. This side was where it had all that broken out buckling on it. And again, this is completely smooth. You cannot see damage on it. Up here, there is a piece of veneer missing. I chose to leave that alone and just consider it character to this piece because I could not find a matching wood to this, and it would have shown worse if I had put a piece of veneer in there that did not match. And this is such a rough put together piece that it really didn't matter to me that that little piece is gone. And so now this piece is ready to be used for whatever purpose, whether decorative, to put small things in it, to put a treasure box for someone, and I'm happy with it. I had a piece cut to do a false bottom on the inside of this with some peel and stick paper, but the paper that came in from Amazon was not remotely what it was supposed to be. As happens frequently when you order something online, it doesn't come in the color you want. So at some point I will probably put that on the inside of this when I find something that actually is the right colors and comes in correctly. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe. Your support means a lot to us and helps this channel get to the point that it will be monetized. Thank you.